So what's up, America? What's going on, America? Good afternoon, America. 12/13, Friday, April 10, 2020. And we're going to talk about how the New York Fed is owned, lock, stock, and barrel, by Citibank and JP Morgan. Who owns the stocks of these feds? Well, the big-ass banks, not the American people. The American people is barely even consulted. The Fed is for the banks. It's for the U.S. Treasury. It's not for the people. We don't even have Federal Reserve accounts. So I want to talk about the Fed because of this, $6 trillion coronavirus bill. First, I would like to give a shout-out to all the, celebrities that have caught this thing. Greta Thunberg, I hope she's, recovering. Rand Paul, Slim Thug, John Prine died. Coronavirus took John Prine, so shit. Boris Johnson, Mitt Romney, Chris Cuomo, Tom Hanks, his wife Rita, and Pink. Pink recently, the singer, tested positive for coronavirus too. So those are, that was about 2 days ago. So, John Prine's dead, so who knows? So hopefully, sending good vibes out to Tom Hanks, Cuomo, Romney, and the rest. Hopefully everybody, can beat this thing and get past it and live a nice, strong, fruitful life. So, why are people so afraid of communism? Oh my God, it's a communist! The New York Fed is owned by Citibank and JP Morgan. Lock, stock, and barrel. Lock, stock, and barrel. The Federal Reserve does not treat us, the American people, right. Elizabeth Warren floated a bill in 2013 when she used to be a progressive, titled Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, where students would receive the same interest rate as the Fed's interest rate. To the banks to take out credit to meet the U.S. Central Bank's overnight reserve requirements. Right? So should the students have the same interest rate as the banks? No, we shouldn't. College loans interest rate are actually 1% higher than the federal funds rate. Interest rates on student loans are determined by the Department of Education, but the Federal Reserve rates definitely influence the 30-year mortgages. They influence the, 10-year bonds, 30-year mortgages, and other shit. So, and college loan interest rates. So the Federal Reserve could do some quantitative fucking tricks if they actually gave a shit to help out the student college debt. Why don't they do this? Of course you know why. Because the New York Fed is owned lock, stock, and barrel by Citibank and JP Morgan. That ugly ass fuck is still alive. So, okay, the New York Fed. Let's get down to the New York Fed. You got 12 member banks. You got the Federal Reserve. You got the Federal Open Market Committee. That's the central bank. The central bank is made up of 3 entities. The 12 Dirty Dozen banks, regional banks like Kansas City Fed, New York Fed, St. Louis Fed, Atlanta Fed, Detroit Fed, Baltimore Fed, San Francisco Fed. I'm not sure. There's 12 cities that the banks actually. So you have, let's see, the New York Fed, right? The New York Fed is one of the 12 banks, and they're a permanent member on the, Federal Open Market Committee. The New York Fed, they're kind of publishing their minutes online now. They're kind of like with their bureaucratic fucking talking points and shit. So just like the Federal Open Market Committee, only now. But only now, in 2020, is the New York Fed freely disclosing who the bank's shareholders are. They didn't before. In fact, the New York Fed declares itself a privately owned institution. It says on its website, it's a privately owned institution. It doesn't have to listen to Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA request, which, thanks, Ralph Nader, the institutional investor did a Freedom of Information Act request on the New York Fed to disclose who are their investors, who owns the bank's shareholders. Could you imagine? I think land, gold, U.S. dollar, I think these are very, very strong currencies, commodities, what have you. gold, U.S. dollar, and land. That's the holy trinity when it comes to my economics, my understanding of the economic system. But imagine having a share of the Bank of Banks, the American Bank, the Central Bank of America. Who owns the bank shares? Well, let's find out, okay? Citibank and JP Morgan. Okay, so private versus public. There's this debate has been had. I can see, kind of both ways. I think ultimately it's a government entity. It's government created, government paid for. So they're public, right? They're there for us. The U.S. Bank is there for America. Is it just for the American government? Aren't they representatives? It's not for the fucking people. But I think they keep saying over and over again that they're not for the American people. They're private, right? We're private. We don't have to listen to you. We don't have to tell you who owns our shares. We don't have to tell you who owns the shares. We pay all these bank presidents. The U.S. government pays the federal board, $200,000, $400,000 a year. So it's clear to me that, it's public, but who the fuck knows what the courts think? And then the banks themselves, I think they're just going to argue private because they, don't want to be held to account. They will hide behind their private status so they can be, free to do as they please without the people of America knowing what the fuck is up. New York Fed is owned by Citibank and JP Morgan. New York Fed board is a 9-person board. All 12 of the dirty dozen banks got 9-person boards. The Fed's 7-year board with 14-year terms. Bank president. All the dirty dozen banks have 9-person boards and a bank president. 9-member board of directors are the ones who pick the federal bank presidents. And then the federal bank presidents serve for 5-year terms. So the New York Fed, the president, 5-year terms. New York Fed is more powerful because they are a permanent member of the Federal Open Market Committee. They're a permanent member, so they're just like the Fed. Whoever is the president of the New York Fed and the board of directors of all these banks are chosen by the Federal Reserve or the banks themselves. So this is just an insular thing. Who owns the New York Fed? They own themselves. None of this, they try to say they care about the public and try to get a few members of the public, like a fucking president of a goddamn college, a CEO of some big corporate, an ex-CEO. No, they represent the public. So they try to, they give the illusion that there's a member of the public, but the member of the public, we're not a part of it. We don't have Federal Reserve accounts. They're the Bank of Banks. They are the intermediary between the U.S. Treasury and the nation's banks. So since the New York Fed is a permanent member of the Federal Open Market Committee, and because there's 2 vacancies in the Board of Governors, bank presidents, the 5 at least, have the same voting power as the Board of Governors. It's 5-5. So that means the New York Fed is powerful as fuck when it comes to our monetary policy, when it comes to our money supply, when it comes to the trillions of dollars that Congress just handed to them. Now, in 2007, things were totally different. Before the Great Recession, JP Morgan had owned 42% of the New York Fed's shares, and Citibank owned 37%. And those numbers have totally changed. So back in 2007, JP Morgan and Citibank still own the New York Fed. They own 79% of all their shares. Now, the numbers have changed. Citibank actually owns more New York Federal Bank stock shares today, 43% or 2018. So yeah, thanks for giving us updated numbers. 2018. So the Citibank has 43%, 88 million New York Fed stock shares. JP Morgan's number 2 with 61 million shares, which is 30% of the total. So if you put Citibank and JP Morgan combined, they own the New York Fed. They own the New York Fed 73%. Anything that Citibank and JP Morgan wants, they get. So New York, you think you got Cuomo and de Blasio and all those politicians. No. New York is sucking the dick of Citibank and JP Morgan and whoever's in, the New York Fed's district. Because I know a lot of these, they got several states, so like Kansas City Fed. So the New York Fed is owned lock, stock, and barrel by Citibank, by JP Morgan. Does that make you feel good? Does that make you feel comfortable, America? These private banks, these private institutions are buying the central bank, and they're claiming that they're privately owned too. The executive, judicial, legislative branches are bought, money controls our politics. You think that there's any chance whatsoever that the Federal Reserve is not corrupt as fuck? Is there any chance in hell at all? Wells Fargo, they're still, divvying out their dividends. You got a lot of banks in Europe trying to save some money, but Wells Fargo's like, yeah, fuck you, America. We're going to borrow a bunch of billions of dollars and shit. We can pay dividends. We have golden parachutes, put more money in our pocket. So Wells Fargo, they're going to, be ballsy and say, hey, we're paying fat dividends. That's good for the shareholders, right? That's like their fiduciary responsibility to make as much profit and to pay fat dividends to their shareholders. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Only Wells Fargo's stock is down 48%. Shit, 50%. 50%? Down 50%, half of it. Wells Fargo is worth half of what it used to be worth. But don't worry, America, you're going to get your dividend payments. Yeah, the 1% will get their dividends. 1% of America own 2/3 of the stocks. 1% of America owns 2/3 of all the stocks in America. So therefore, most people in America don't own stocks. They're not part of Wall Street. If Wall Street collapses, that's because the American people don't have their shit together. Didn't we already go through a Great Depression? You can't trust these bastards. You can't trust the fucking banks. There's a reason why we are against paper money and the centralized banks for such a long time in this country. Jesus Christ. Our founders, Abraham Lincoln, JFK, Andrew Jackson, that was his whole... He killed the bank, right? They were trying to kill him, he killed them. Hating the banks is like as Americans apple fucking pie. Fuck the goddamn banks. Are you kidding me? Fuck a bank. Fuck a motherfucking bank. Citigroup and JP Morgan is also down. Investment code KBW Bank ETF. It's down 42%. Investco Bank. Who is investing in Investco Bank? Oh, that's my bank. I don't know. There's a shit ton of fucking banks, aren't there? Credit unions, too. So, 73% of the New York Fed is owned by Citibank Incorporated and JP Morgan banks, financial, go fuck yourself America services. So, big holders, it's not just Citibank and JP Morgan, but they own 73%. Who else owns the New York Fed? Well, some big holders are affiliates of foreign banks. HSBC Bank USA, that's a London-based company. So London owns 12.6 million shares, 6% of the Fed. Deutsche Bank Trust Company America, so it's the American version of the German banks. They own 1.7 million shares, and Deutsche Bank Trust Company owns 61,000, about 1% of the New York Fed. So you got London, you got Britain who owns a part of the New York Fed, you got the German bank who owns the New York Fed, you got the Mizuho Bank, a Tokyo-based industrial commercial bank in China, held 800,000 and 200,000 shares. So that's way fucking more than, the percentage. So that's what, 5, 6, 7%. Morgan Stanley Bank owns 4.8 million. An affiliate Morgan Stanley Private Bank, because you got Morgan Stanley Bank and you got Morgan Stanley Private Bank, completely two different banks. I'm sure they don't ever talk to each other, show each other's books and whatnot. 2.8 million shares, that's 3.7% of the New York Fed. Goldman Sachs Bank USA owns 8.3 million shares, 4% of the New York Fed. And the Bank of New York Mellon. Mellon? What the fuck, Bank of New York? Bank of New York wasn't good enough? Fucking Mellon. Oh, okay, well, Bank of Colorado, fucking Cantaloupe. They held 7.2 million shares, at 3.5%. So, the 800,000, 1 million shares. What's 1 million shares? Do we find 1 million shares? It's about 1%, right? So, about 1%. That's what Japan, or China, Tokyo. Tokyo is Japan. Right? Yeah. So Japan owns 800,000 shares. China owns 200,000 shares. Germany, Britain, Japan, China, and then also, other big-ass banks, Goldman Sachs Bank USA, they got 8.3 million shares. Bank of New York Mellon. So that's who owns, if you put all those together, all those people own 91% of the Fed. So who owns the, New York Fed? Who owns the New York Fed? Are they public? Are they private? Are they for America? Are they for, the financial elite, the 1,000 oligarchs, the plutocracy that run this nation, the Leviathan plutocracy? They own 91%, but not the American people. We don't even have an account with the Fed. We have to beg these private fucking banks to get an account. And for what? To save our fucking money so they can, exploit it? I would rather put it, have a bank where they just hold my money and they can let me, use checking. And then I'm a part of the decisions of the bank. That's the kind of bank I would like to be a part of. Instead of this asymmetrical relationship where they just shove you, 20,000 forms. And when you put the money in the goddamn bank, it's gone. It's not your bank. It's a liability on the bank. It's a demand deposit, but it's a, just a mark on the, screen of a computer. It's an electronic input. It's a file on the computer. So your money, as soon as it goes into the bank, they take 90% of it and they're investing it in whatever the fuck, loans to their buddies and shit. And then they take 10% and give it to the Fed. So as long as they got saved 10% of your money, then that's considered being safe, and therefore they could, spend your money willy-nilly. When you give your money to the bank, they got to, give you the money back when you demand for it. But I believe that it's a bank liability, and so technically it's not your money once you give it to them. So the American people had nothing to do with the Fed at all. We're not even part of the goddamn decision. Wouldn't it be in the, central bank's best interest if every single American had an account? Yeah, Social Security, everybody gets a fucking number and shit. Yeah, I understand that. You can opt out. But I think it'd be great to have an account with the Federal Reserve. It'd be great to have a government-sponsored bank that actually says, yes, you could have checking and savings without us, taking your money and rolling the dice on Wall Street, going to the fucking casino and playing blackjack with it, and giving loans to their friends and their family. So this corruption, you're financing the corruption of the fucking bank. You're financing the bank's corruption. Do they help you out? They giving you a fucking loan? I've, had banks, they never said, hey, you want to, buy a house? Hey, what the fuck is the point of fucking banks? They're privatized, so they're just trying to fucking, skim the cream off the top, trying to maximize profits. They don't give a shit about helping people. They're not like savings and loans of, It's a Wonderful Life. They're not like a bank that actually wants to help people. So who owns the New York Fed? Not the American people, not the New York people, not even the American government, not the American government, not the New York government. Who owns the New York Fed? The big banks, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Bank of New York Mellon, especially Citigroup and JP Morgan, who own 73%, and also Britain and Germany and Japan and China. And they own, about fucking 8%. Britain owns 6%. So New York, Britain owns most of, out of all the affiliates of the foreign banks, Britain owns most of the New York Fed. The government, the nation, state of Britain, not the people. And then Germany, 1%, and then, Tokyo, maybe 1%, Bank of China, just less than 0.1%. So who owns the New York Fed? Citigroup, JP Morgan, short answer. Long answer, about 8% owned by the foreign governments of the world, and then, so Citigroup, JP Morgan, and maybe, 11% of other big banks, and no Americans, none of the American people, no American citizens, no individuals, no individuals have, stock in the Fed or hold an account. It's banks, whoever owns the fucking banks, they got, and then the U.S. Treasury. But but not the American people. So, yeah, New York, might as well just suck the dick of Citigroup and JP Morgan. That's who your fucking paymasters are. JP Morgan and Citigroup owns fucking New York Fed, so they own New York City, New York State. New York people are bought, sold, by the New York Fed. If the New York government, New York people, New York City people wanted something different, they couldn't get it. They couldn't get it because, this monetary policy, they've already seeped in, and now they're already a part of the goddamn, 100 years, right? The Fed's over 100 years old. It's an institution by now. And even if the Fed started out by being good, it's very possible that the people who understand monetary theory and economics and the financial system and politics and who's going to actually invest on the, in the Fed, who would actually know how to invest, in the financial market and to know enough to be able to not take a bath on it? Who can actually do that? So you'd have to know a shit ton. You'd have to know the right people. $6 trillion. This is a big fucking sellout to the financial industry that props up fucking banks that are about to fail, give up bailouts and shit, loans, billions of fucking dollars, basically give them all the liquidity in the world. But if you, Joe Q. Public, if you're bankrupt, you lose your small business, you lose your job, does anybody say, oh shit, we want to make sure you're solvent, make sure you have plenty of liquidity, make sure you have plenty of cash, make sure you can take your assets, get collateral, and you can be able to, get some money, shuffle some money around and be able to, get the economy started, shore up your assets. Don't lend money out to people. That's, if the government give you $6 trillion in your bank, don't lend out to people. That's not good for the, stockholders. You want to shore up the assets. You want to close down on all those mortgages and, take the land or get that money, squeeze the American people as, hard as you could squeeze them. That's what you do if you're a bank, a privately owned bank, just looking for profits. So who owns the New York Fed? Not you or I, Cupcake. All right. John Masters, 12:35 p.m., Friday, April 10th, 2020. Peace!